Wonderful. So you joined Yamaha, you're part of the digital music department, and what were some of the early developments that were happening during that period of time when you first came?
Well, Yamaha had a relationship with Stanford University and the Center for Computer Research in Music and Acoustics.
Mm-hmm.
There was a fellow there by the name of Dr. John Chowning who developed a theory of frequency modulation synthesis that a few forward-thinking engineers and people at the Yamaha Corporation in Japan realized the potential.
And what was the competing synthesis of the day, so to speak, if there was one?
At that time, it was mostly discrete analog synthesizers, modular synthesizers and analog synthesizers. Dr. Robert Moog was the first one to build a commercially successful synthesizer, but it was purely analog.
When we're talking about synthesizer, we're talking about waveforms. Can you give a description of the different type of waveforms the FM to the analog might be? Or
well, analog was the early technology where the components were pretty discrete. You had a voltage-controlled oscillator that produced some sort of waveform that was then routed to a voltage-controlled amplifier, which controlled the shape of that waveform in terms of its time. And then there was a voltage-controlled filter. So this was the early analog signal path with these components. And between the filter and the amplifier, which is also called an envelope generator, which gives you the attack, release, the decay, the sustain, and all those parameters, and the filter, which has cutoff and resonance, it's basically known as subtractive synthesis. So your oscillator produces a waveform with lots of harmonics.
Okay, right.
And then between the
In
amplifier
other words, like
and
just
the filter,
all the notes at a time. If you were to play a keyboard and just kind of hit all the keys all at once, that sort of thing.
in a sense,
okay,
the sound that you hear is rich with all the harmonics of at whatever pitch that you choose that oscillator to operate at.
Right.
And then in order to achieve the sound that you want, you use the amplifier and mostly the filter to remove the undesirable components.
Okay.
So it's called subtractive synthesis.
Okay.
So you start off with a lot of things and you take out what you don't want to end up with the result. Frequency modulation synthesis is entirely different in that you have two sources of your waveforms, which are then, one is fed into the other to modulate it. And according to the frequency of those waveforms, you end up with harmonically rich, you generate the harmonics.
So would that be
waveform.
Additive synthesis then?
Well, additive synthesis is different in that the original additive synthesizers were just a whole bunch of very simple analog oscillators, voltage-controlled oscillators, where you had one oscillator for each harmonic that you wanted to add to the sound.
Okay.
So you would add those together to come up with your harmonic result, instead of starting with all the harmonics and subtracting what you didn't want with subtractive. Additive was a series of harmonic generators that you added together.
And to give Kids Talk Radio audience a sense, you know, when he's talking about harmonics, each note has subnotes or partials that create the color of that note. And there's a certain sequence or overtone series that note generates. And this controls the color, the pitch, and various characteristics of a particular note. So
the harmonic content of a note from a clarinet has a signature that your ear identifies as a clarinet that makes it different from a trumpet, that makes it different from a bassoon, or
which has to do with the cone shape or the cylindrical shape of the instrument.
But ultimately, it's the harmonic content of of the waveforms that those instruments produce that allow you to recognize them as a brass or a woodwind or a plucked string or those kinds of things.
And so this is what a synthesizer or a controller has to essentially bring about. So
that's been the goal of synthesizers from the very beginning, to create the harmonic spectrum of all of these different sounds that allow our ears to clue in and identify them as being of a particular family or a particular musical application.
So I take it there's been an evolution in the synthesis. What were some of the early synthesis limitations? What were they capable of doing compared to what we can do today?
Well, it has been an interesting journey.
Yeah.
You know, the early analog synthesizers that you hear in the music of the 70s and those kinds of things, the application of synthesizers has changed as they became capable of doing different things. When we introduced FM synthesis technology to the market in the early 80s, it became you know, one of the most predominant sounds in pop music of the early 80s, with its electronic piano type timbres and sounds and its other capabilities. So frequency modulation synthesis opened up a whole new spectrum of application for synthesizers, and they became quite keyboard oriented. And then, and like I said, that was a result of Yamaha's relationship with Dr. Chowning at the Stanford Center for Computer Research in Music and Acoustics. And then, sampling technology came to the forefront and was developed and made more affordable. And so then it became, instead of generating the sounds, you captured the sounds in a recording and then delivered them from a keyboard or some other instrument.
Sure.
So that became kind of like a snapshot. You could take very accurate pictures of instruments and then through sampling technology reproduce them and perform with them as if you were playing the actual instrument itself.
And they kind of do that in today where they're sampling.
It's still very predominant today.
Yeah. There's also trademark issues, copyright issues that come along with that, but that's another issue.
That's another, that's another can of worms.